Okay, so today I get to talk about misogyny. Yay! So as a man, of course, I'm an expert on the topic, as obviously, and look, okay, you're laughing. Okay, you could laugh all you like, but I have personal experience of being at the end of being sexually harassed. Okay, so when I was a young man, I used to have long hair as a rock and roll guitar player. Drove up to the traffic lights. Okay, these guys pulled up next to me, and they're like, "Woo, woo, Shazi, woo, woo," like this. And I turned around, and they're like, "Oh, bloody hell, it's a bloke." So I can't say I've necessarily got a lot of experience, but anyway, there you go. All right, so I'm trying to crack a joke or two at the beginning of what can be quite a heavy topic. So I'll try to make it as keep it as real as I can. And but I want also I'm really interested today, especially to hear from your perspectives. And so please do pop anything you want to put in there, or any responses or anything. Please do pop them into the chat. And I think we can do hands up for questions and things like that as well, because I'd be really interested to get people's feedback. Okay, so right. So one of the I guess one of the main reasons why this has become a topic of my interest and my study is because of Bhikkhuni ordination, and it's something that when we started to support Bhikkhuni ordination, then I found what was to me a very strange dynamic, that there was something that seemed to me was fairly simple and fairly obviously a good thing to be able to do, and yet people who I knew, especially monks who I knew, started having all of these sort of strange reactions. And I began to sort of, this is something I had to learn as an adult. And I'm sure, basically, I do feel kind of weird about it, because I'm sure that for probably all the women here, this is something that you're like, of course men are like that, right? But I didn't notice until I was already an adult, and you didn't notice that men specifically, were having all of these weird reactions to the idea that we should be treating women, like human beings, I guess. And I found that that when discussing it, that the initial response from the men who had that position of power and privilege was to justify it in terms of legalities and in terms of rational explanations. Now, these legalities and rational explanations drew from places like the Pali Vinaya and so on and so forth, and they alleged that there were certain insuperable logistical and other kinds of objections which made it impossible for women to ordain. That's a kind of the standard line in Theravada Buddhism. So after a while, then I began to read those texts myself, the ones that were supposedly an insuperable legal objection. And I found that they didn't really support that argument, and on a variety of grounds. And so did others. And so a variety of other scholars also studied that area and did a lot of work in that area. In fact, we came to Hamburg when was it, 2006, I think, something like that, and did a Bhikkhuni Congress in Hamburg that was put on by Venerable Jampa Sedron to try to create a weight of support for getting the Dalai Lama to officially endorse Bhikkhuni ordination in the Tibetan tradition. But more generally, it was also a discussion to foreground the importance of Bhikkhuni ordination. And that was great. That was a really good Congress. with some exceptions. Again, the same kind of thing that I mentioned before, like weirdly excessive emotional reactions caused by kind of repression on the part of some monks who weren't really willing to go there. But in any case, the main point I was making was that there was a large body of research that had been done to show that these kind of supposedly technical objections weren't really valid. Now, perhaps if you're familiar with how misogyny works and how patriarchy works and so on, then you'd probably say, well, duh, obviously, which is fair enough. And I think that's fairly obvious that that would be the case. Regardless of the legal issues, it's also worth noting, I think, that before we started doing any of this, so around, I think, the late 90s, I don't have an exact date on it, but around the late 90s, there was in Thailand a Thai Senate Select inquiry into the question of Bhikkhuni ordination. And this Senate Select Committee heard from various people about this and various submissions, and their conclusion was that Bhikkhuni ordination was valid. Their conclusion was that the opposition to Bhikkhuni ordination, that the ruling on behalf of the Thai Sangha Council that Bhikkhuni ordination was invalid, that ruling was unconstitutional on two grounds. First of all, on the grounds of gender equality, and also on the grounds of freedom of religion. So that's, as far as I'm aware, the highest legal ruling in Thailand to date on the question of Bhikkhuni ordination. And I think that the Thai Senate Select Committee was obviously correct, and the opposition to Bhikkhuni ordination does in fact violate gender equality, and it does in fact violate freedom of religious choice. And make no mistake that those who are opposing Bhikkhuni ordination do not merely not participate in it, they do whatever they can to stop it and to stamp it out. Let's make no bones about that. It's not just merely an absence of doing it. Anyway, so we're at this point where all of these legalities and so on fall apart, and I'm not going to discuss those legalities now, but my point is that at the end of that, then the opposition to Bhikkhuni ordination remained, and that was what told me very clearly that there was something more. There was something emotional, there was a feeling or something like that, and that's what I would call misogyny. Now, at the time, I wrote a rather lengthy book called White Bones, Red Rot, Black Snakes, which is awesome, and you should read it. I've got to do, stop laughing. I've got to do my own promotion. No one else is going to do it for me. So why not? Okay. Even if you think it's terrible, it's got nice pictures in it. So at least it's got some nice pictures. White Bones, Red Rot, Black Snakes. So what I did with that book was that I looked at, essentially I looked at mythology and iconography in a Buddhist point of view, because mythology and iconography often encodes things that maybe are unconscious or subconscious that aren't going to be recorded in the actual explicit doctrines. And so I wanted to look at how women are depicted and how they find their own voice, or the voice is depicted through those texts. And so that was a kind of a long exploration that I did. It took me a while to really come around to the understanding that there is such a thing as misogyny, and it's a really powerful force. Like it wasn't something that figured in my life really. And I actually spoke to my dad about this a couple of years ago, and I said to him, I thanked him for not bringing me up with all of this toxic masculinity bullshit, and we just talked about it a bit. And he just said, he said he always just couldn't stand that kind of thing, and like objectifying women or catcalling or talking about them, all of this kind of thing. He said when he was young and some of his mates would talk about them like that, he just always found it really repulsive and never wanted to have anything to do with it. So he somehow passed this down to me. It's not like something that I feel is personally, it's not something I feel is special or anything. I just feel like it's just normal. But anyway, so I had to discover it as an adult, like what misogyny is. So let me just define a few terms here. Misogyny, I would define as being an inner defilement of hatred or despising or looking down on women. patriarchy is, so misogyny is personal, right? And misogyny is an inner defilement. And one of the reasons why Buddhists, I think, find a hard time reckoning with this is because they find a hard time reckoning with the fact that their teachers might have defilements, particularly ones that are so crude and stupid. Okay, so that's one. That's the inner defilement. The second term, as I use it, is patriarchy. So I use patriarchy to talk about specifically institutions that have been set up that are under the control of men. Typically, like absolute patriarchies, there's no women involved at all, or if there are any, then they have a subordinate role within that. So that's patriarchy. So misogyny is internal, patriarchy is institutional. So one of the arguments, it was one of the first people to write about on this topic, was Rita Gross, an American scholar from the Tibetan Buddhist world. And she wrote a book called Buddhism After Patriarchy in the 90s, I believe. It's been a long time since I read that, so don't take me too seriously in like representing what she said. But basically, one of the things I think that she presented was that Buddhism often has these sexist institutions, but rarely does it express outright misogyny. So that was Rita's argument, and I think that we should. I'd like to. I don't think that's adequate, to be honest, because I think that what happens then is that gives an allowance for men within patriarchal institutions to say, oh, yes, but it wasn't me. And it provides that kind of moral impunity to men. So I would rather see these things as being interrelated, that misogyny is the inner drive that leads to the creation of patriarchy, and patriarchy is what enables and supports the inner misogyny. So these two things, I think, go together. Not to say that everyone in a patriarchal institution is a misogynist, nor is it to say that everyone who is a misogynist is in a patriarchal institution. Like those things are to some degree independent, but I do believe that they reinforce each other. So what I would like to do for this talk, to begin with, I would like to go to I would like to look at this, first of all, from the position of fundamental Buddhist teachings. One of the things that I find is an unfortunate kind of manner of presentation of these issues is that people will then look at various things that the Buddha said about women. Okay? First of all, many or most of those are either historically dubious or at least require contextualization and so on. And so we can get in the weeds of a text critical argument about those very small number of passages that get cited again and again. And we can do that, but most of those have been studied to death. And so I'm not that interested in that. One of the problems with that is that it frames this issue as something where if you want equality and decency, then you need to be on the defensive to explain these things which are on the side of something that isn't equality and decency, right? And I don't feel that that's a position that I don't think that we deserve to be in that position. It should be the other way around. So what I'm going to do is to look at the fundamental factors of the Dhamma. I'm going to look briefly for this evening at the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And I'm going to consider the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path through the light of misogyny. So let us begin. So first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, right view. Okay? So let us consider, what did the Buddha say is right view? Yeah, suffering. Yeah, okay, suffering. And as far as I know, that's something that we all share in common, right? Pretty much, yeah. As far as I know, Again, it's not from my experience, but please confirm. As far as I know, women also suffer. Is that correct? Or is that something that only for, only for men? Is that right? Women also suffer. Yeah, I feel like at least as much as men, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in like a dukkha competition or anything like that, but still, I don't think that there's any question that suffering is something which is not just even universal for human, but universal for all sentient beings. And so this to me is like the foundation of the Buddha's teaching. Sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings be happy, you know. And you have this wonderful teaching of metta, you know. And it's kind of wild that you have this teaching of metta, that the Buddha was so universal, right? All beings above and below and around and high and low and all of these kinds of things. If you listen to the way that those words have been adapted in modern Theravada countries, it says sabbe. So may all bhikkhus be happy. May all laymen be happy. May all lay women be happy. May all samaneras be happy. May all samaneries be happy. Literally, the chant of metta is everyone be happy except for bhikkhunis. Okay, there's modern Theravada. You find this chanted throughout Theravada countries. Okay, so something has gone wrong here, right? Something has gone wrong. That's not from the suttas, just to be clear, but this is what there is. So all beings, and that cause of suffering, of course, craving. Yeah? Again, I believe craving not just unique to men. I think craving, ignorance, greed, hatred, and delusion, we all share those things in common. So we can all find a shared humanity in our common defilements. So that's nice. Well, I don't know if it's nice, but it's real anyway. And so the idea that you can somehow isolate or distinguish or discriminate one group of humans as being somehow less worthy or less part of the path or less meaningful spiritually it completely violates the whole spirit of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. So right view is that these are the things that are important, and we create our lives through the choices that we make, through the karma that we make. So when misogyny makes its way through Buddhist teachings, then we find various kinds of wrong view left in its wake. So people will say, a common view held in Theravada countries is that rebirth as a woman is as a result of bad karma in the past life. Okay? So it's quite a commonly held view. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah. And needless to say, this is not anything that the Buddha taught at all. It's not part of the Buddha's teachings. In fact, the Buddha's teachings is that rebirth in the human realm is the result of good karma, right? So all those who got reborn in the human realm did so as a result of good karma. And that is regardless of any of the kind of the details, that is right view in Buddhism. Right view is that the human realm is a sugati. It's a fortunate realm to be born in. So everybody here got reborn in this realm because of good karma. And so it's explicitly bad. It's explicitly wrong view to say that women were reborn as a result of bad karma. So there are many other instances like this where once you start down that road, then you start to step off the path of right view. In the earliest teachings from the time of the Buddha, we have many recorded instances of women who realized full awakening. And we have a whole book in the Pali Canon, the Therigatha, that records and recollects those great bhikkhunis who became arahants. And there are many examples also of lay women who attained various stages of enlightenment and who are praised for their wisdom and so on and so forth. And so you find from the Buddha's teachings this legacy of recognition and support for the spiritual attainments of women. And this is presented as being in a way that is quite unashamed. I'll just give you one example of this. There is one of the Therigatha verses by Bhadda Kapilani, and she talks about her former husband, who was Mahakassapa. And she says Mahakassapa was such a great monk. He had attained all of these great things. He'd got these psychic powers and realized these stages of enlightenment, found freedom from all suffering, and so on and so forth. And she's doing this whole thing about how great her man was. Okay? They were married before they ordained. And at the last verse, she says, and you know what? I've attained all of those things as well. And I'm his equal in every way. Yeah? That's the boldness that you get from those teachings in the Therigatha. Completely just straight out saying about their own strengths and their own attainments and their own realizations. And I think this is such a powerful example, which we should be proud of and we should be elevating, and we should be showing that this is something which is fundamental to who we are as a Buddhist community. Okay, so this is about right view. So in my view, I think it's very clear that the idea that women should be, that any kind of discrimination, and here just to note that here we're talking about discrimination against women, but any kind of discrimination on the basis of sexuality, basis of gender, basis on race, based on ability or cognitive capacity or anything like that is always unacceptable from a Buddhist point of view. And any time that you encounter anything like that, just remember sabbe satta, this is the Buddha's fundamental teaching, all beings. So many times, again and again, sabbe satta, may all beings be happy. Okay, so right view, the next part of the, so misogyny, I would say, falls under wrong view, because it falls under the idea that women have a naturally inferior spiritual potential than men, and that's something which is against what the Buddha taught. So not only is it wrong view, it's also, I would argue, wrong intention, the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So wrong intention is where we create and we move into action from our view. And this is usually described as being based on, so right intention is based on renunciation, on kindness, and on love, on compassion. And so these things also, it seems to me, all speak to the fact that misogyny is clearly against all of these things. So let me just break it down a little bit. So the first one is the based on sensuality or desire or renunciation, right? So sorry, I'm getting confused here. Wrong intention is intention based on desire or based on greed or based on lust, and then right intention is based on letting go, based on renunciation, based on giving up. So this whole kind of area and the whole kind of area of misogyny is intrinsically based on a weird perversion of sexual desire. And it clearly is based around all of these things, and clearly is based around men who can't control themselves around women. And so you have this kind of weird thing where men think that they get to police women's dress, women's appearance, women's posture, women's voices, and so on, and just sort of assume that they have the right to be able to tell women what they like and what they do. It's a very kind of weird kind of way of being that men seem to have. I mean, sex is such a powerful drive, and there are so many people who get so messed up about it that it seems It seems that I don't want to kind of overgeneralize, but let me just say what I actually think. What I actually think is that a lot of men don't actually grow out of like adolescence or whatever, and they haven't yet kind of learned to talk to women or just be normal around women and just have a kind of a normal relationship. And so what they project onto that is their own sexualized desires and frustrations and so on. It's interesting that in the suttas, there's a question that's asked one time about how monks deal with their sexual desire. And the answer that's given is that when they see a woman who is older than them, they think of her as their mother. And when they see a woman who's younger than them, they think of her as their daughter. And when they see a woman the same age, they think of her as their sister. So this is the first thing that we do, is to think of women as friends, as family, as people that we can love and care for and respect. And that basis of care and respect is the foundation for a healthy just life, I guess, emotionality and so on. And if you're not able to do that and you project onto all kinds of relationships between men and women as being somehow sexualized and somehow driven by blaming women for your projection of their sexuality, then this is something which is inherently unhealthy. It's not just imperfect. It's all right. It's not just something that you wouldn't expect from an enlightened being. It's something which indicates that there's been a breakdown in normal and healthy emotional development. And the fact that we get used to that and we think that that's normal, right, isn't a sign that it's actually healthy. It's a sign that unhealth is widespread. And we should think that it should be normal that people can have those kinds of healthy relationships and attitudes towards each other. So next one on the wrong intention is the intention of hate, which of course is intrinsic to the idea of misogyny. Now, of course, everyone knows that hate is un-Buddhist, right? That's not a question. And Buddhists who are misogynistic would not say that they hate women, right? So no one's going to go around and say that. But not to forget that hate is kind of, when we use the word hate, it sounds very strong, but it can have a whole kind of spectrum, right? So anything to like looking down on or holding in contempt and so on and so forth also would be included under this. One of the things that helped me to understand this was the anthropology of Levi-Strauss, who wrote about different kinds of concepts in different cultures. And he used the concept of, he defined dirt as matter out of place. I had a friend who was a biologist. He said the same thing. He said a weed is a plant growing where you don't want it. And a lot of the way that misogyny expresses itself is not that I hate women, but it's that I hate women who are out of their place. So their place being the kitchen, obviously, the bedroom, or wherever you want them to be, and that they are not. It also might be women who are not being a woman in the way that you think that women should be women. So women should be petite and submissive and pretty and obedient and all of those things. And they shouldn't have like big noses, and they certainly shouldn't have loud laughs or broad shoulders. And they certainly shouldn't be like interested in video games or do any of those things, because those things are, not the right way of doing femininity. So you begin by kind of policing these kinds of things. And so when you see these things being called out, you often have like people will say, "Oh, I couldn't be, against women. I have a wife, I have a daughter, something like that." But it's like, yes, you're surrounded by women who you've put into those roles, and you see them in those kinds of roles, rather than having women who are your colleagues and your friends and people who are your support when you need it, and all of those things, actual human beings. So hatred, yeah. And it has a way of seeping in, it has a way of seeping through, it has a way of diminishing and reducing and impoverishing any kind of relationship or connection that you have. Because when the hatred is bad, then we call that cruelty, which is the last one of here, and cruelty being the desire to hurt. And the literal word in Pali is hingsa, which literally means that it's a desiderative form. In fact, when we were in Oxford last with Professor Gombrich, we were talking about this. Hingsa is a desiderative form, meaning the desire to hurt. And cruelty is one of those things that is, I feel that it is kind of a taboo to talk about in a public sphere. Or maybe that's changed, I think, recently. I think perhaps recently it's changed. But we don't like to think that others are doing things just because they get off on causing pain, right? But in fact, that I think is in fact often the case. I'll just tell you an example of what I'm thinking about. When I was young, when I was in Perth, there was this kind of I don't know, business guru, whatever, came to visit, did this thing, it's a conference or whatever. And there was a news article about him, and I read the news article. And one thing about it always stuck in my mind. And this guru, the business guru, said to all of the people there, he said, when you've made it, you've got your nice house, you've got everything you want, you've got your latest model Mercedes, you've got everything you want, you've made it. Then the last thing you need to do, the icing on the cake, is you need to go back to the poorest suburb and drive down the poorest suburb and look at all the people there, and then think to yourself, I've made it and you haven't. And that's when you know that you've really made it. Yeah? And so it's that idea of that cruelty, I think, is intrinsic to it. I think that the idea in greed and having, like the idea of wealth, very often is not so that I can have, it's so that others can have not. I mean, why do you buy a beachfront villa? So that you can go to the beach? No, it's so that you can stop other people from going to the beach. Yeah. And so much of what we conceive of as power is the ability to cause pain. And the purpose and the structure of patriarchy is designed so that men can do what they want and get away with it. And men can hurt women, men can rape women, men can abuse women and get away with it. That's the structure of patriarchy. And you can say what you like about your particular patriarchs. This is one of the things that always kind of gets me. People will say, oh, but not my monks. Okay, I hope so. I really do. I hope that your monks are not doing those things, right? But whatever is happening, A, you don't know because patriarchies hide things. And B, when something happens, not if, when, the patriarchy will close ranks. So it doesn't really matter about the character of those individuals who happen to be there at that time. Maybe they haven't done anything bad. Maybe, quite likely, who knows? But they're contributing to creating that structure which legitimizes men having the power to be able to say what is right and what is wrong, and to be able to say what happens when a woman comes forward and says, this was done to me. In the Pali Vinaya, there is a universal rule in the entire Pali Vinaya that takes it for granted that a monk can only be guilty if they confess. Okay? So no matter what you do, no matter what you've been accused of, no matter if people saw you, no matter if there's witnesses, doesn't matter. In order to be found guilty under the Vinaya, you have to confess. Okay? Every single rule, except one. There is only one exception to that. And that is if a trustworthy laywoman accuses a monk of sexual assault or sexual harassment. And in those cases, the Vinaya makes an exception to say that you should believe her, even if the monk does not confess. Yeah. And that is one of the indications. Like when we kind of hear that's kind of revolutionary even for today. And we know how many cases today that doesn't happen, when you have so many women coming forward and still they're not believed. And still you can get elected president twice, you can get put on the Supreme Court, and all of these kinds of things, yeah, for that one simple thing. So, cruelty. So I was on the topic of cruelty. So patriarchy assembles a social structure that allows men to hurt women and get away with it. And that allows those men who get off on cruelty and causing pain to be able to do that. That's the social function of patriarchy. So we've now talked about right view and wrong view, and we talked about right intention and wrong intention. I want to now talk about right speech a little bit. So as we all know, right speech should be true speech for a start. Now, many of the fundamental ideas in misogyny are simply not true. And the things that men have been saying for countless years aren't true. It's not true that women are less intelligent than men, just as, for example. Now, this is something that you do find in the Buddhist scriptures, okay? So in the Buddhist scriptures, it does say that women are unintelligent, okay? So we have to accept that. Unfortunately, it's Mara who says that, okay? Mara says that women are unintelligent, not the Buddha, Mara, all right? So, and that, of course, is 100% true. It is, in fact, true that people like Mara say things like that, yeah? But the fact is that all of these things which are commonly said by sexists or by misogynists simply aren't true. And they've, sociology and psychology and so on has tested these things to a frankly ridiculous degree. And the amount of effort that's been wasted in psychology in particular to research differences between men and women is frankly a kind of a scandal in the whole field. Because at the end of the day, the basic conclusion is, not that much. And thousands upon thousands upon thousands of studies have been done in order to show that there really isn't all that much difference between men and women, which, okay, fine. So right speech, but speech is more than just being true. Speech is also speech that is kind. So obviously, when you are using demeaning speech that is discriminating against a whole group of women, a whole group of human beings based on their gender or sexuality or race and all of these other things, and this is not kind speech. And that kind of use of discrimination through speech is inherently abusive. You can't be demeaning people based on those things and not be abusive. That's just not how it works. And these things are always setting up a culture and setting up a prelude for causing harm. They cause harm in themselves, and they set up conditions for causing more harm in the future. Speech is not supposed to, so speech is also supposed to be, the other nice one is speech is supposed to be reconciling those who are divided, okay? Again, should be self-evident that misogynistic, sexist, bigoted and discriminatory speech is precisely calculated in order to drive people apart. And one of the things that we find when you speak up against discrimination is that people will accuse you of being divisive. And this is something, of course, this was a major platform that we were attacked on when we supported Bhikkhuni ordination. Actually, what we did was to say, some women asked us, can we ordain as Bhikkhunis? We said, sure, and we gave them the Bhikkhuni ordination. And we were accused of being divisive. It's one of the main things, right? But of course, being divisive, being ungrateful, what that really means is not being submissive. It means not doing what you're told. And it means exposing the fact that their actions were causing harm. One of the things that came out with the Bhikkhuni ordination, when we did our Bhikkhuni ordination in Perth, and a lot of the details of that time are lost in the midst of history, and most of those who were alive then are now dead or dying, or they're like me, they're on their decrepit and on their last legs. But I was there and I remember, and I haven't forgotten anything. And one of the things that happened, one of the reasons why there was such a strong reaction to the Bhikkhuni ordination was that at the same time as we were doing our ordination, the monks in Amaravati and the English monasteries were preparing their own set of 5 rules by which nuns had to lead that were going to guarantee that they could never have Bhikkhuni ordination. We knew nothing about this, right? But that's what they were doing. And the 5 rules included, one of the rules was something like this: no nun should speak in front of a monk. And if a nun is invited to speak in a monk's presence, then she must not take that as a precedent for being able to speak in front of him again in the future. Okay? So, yeah, so this was one of them, and there was a bunch of other ones like that. So this was what was happening at the same time as we were supporting Bhikkhuni ordination. It wasn't our intention to make them look bad, but that's kind of what happened. Anyway, so that's that thing of causing disharmony. And the final thing is that speech should be meaningful. And to me, this is also a very kind of when I hear people talking about this area, I hear a lot of waffle, and I hear a lot of airy speech, and I hear a lot of generalizations and so on, which aren't really borne out by the reality of what happens. And I think that our speech needs to be constructive of meaning. And meaning in Buddhism is not just sort of basic meaning, right? I could say this is a cup and it holds water. That's a meaningful statement. But meaningful in Buddhism means something more. It means that it leads to what is good, leads to what is beneficial, ultimately leads to Nibbana. And so one of the things which Bhikkhu Bodhi pointed out, interestingly enough, was in his talk at the Hamburg conference, and I never forgot this, but he said the purpose of Vinaya is not to obstruct people from practicing the holy life. The purpose of Vinaya is to support people to practice the holy life. And that is what I mean by meaningful speech. So we should be using our speech in order to create a positive outcome and to make the world a better place, rather than using it to make excuses and to justifications. Okay, moving on. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action. Okay, so let me briefly consider the topics on right action. I don't want to talk for too long because I do want to leave time for questions. Right action is to not kill, not steal, and not commit sexual misconduct. So not killing. Okay, so not killing and committing violence. Of course, when it comes to gender-based violence, overwhelmingly men hurt women. And men kill women, men rape women, and that's just the reality. Of course, that's not the whole story, but statistically, that's the majority of the story. And so when women come into a monastery, it is very common that women have an experience of violence behind them. It's probably normal. And I'm looking at all the people who are on this talk here with us today, and I'm knowing that many of you also have histories of violence behind you. And look, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to share with you. I don't. I didn't have a history of abuse growing up or anything like that, and so I can only imagine and try to empathize with people who come from that background of violence. But I know that this is the case. And when I was running a monastery, there were many things that I would learn that would, like people would be scared or nervous about things. I'd be like, yeah, well, there's nothing to be afraid of. What's your problem? Well, the problem was that they were assaulted and they experienced violence many times in their life, and that's left its traces, as I gradually came to learn that I don't make those assumptions about people. So when we put people into a system that doesn't let them have a voice, then we intrinsically expose them to violence. And that itself is to me, that itself is an act of violence to deprive voice of women. It's like rape 101. It's like the first thing you want to do is to make sure that women can't scream, can't say anything, can't speak, and then we can proceed to step number 2. Stealing. So stealing is a crucially important one when it comes to misogyny, and one that is often not thought about in this kind of context. When we did our Bhikkhuni ordination, afterwards they asked Ajahn Brahm to go to Thailand. They had a meeting in Thailand. They kicked Ajahn Brahm out of the Wat Pah Pong organization. Okay, the very next thing after that was concluded, okay, Luang Por Liam, who's the head of the organization, said, "That's it. Draw a line under it. We're finished." But that wasn't finished. And the very next thing that was said was, "How can we get the monastery away from Ajahn Brahm? How can we take the land away from him?" That was the very next thing. And so they consistently pursued actions to try to have the Bodhinyana monastery and Dhammasara monastery removed and put under control of the Thai Sangha. And that happened for quite a while and involved a number of things. I won't go into kind of all of the details of what exactly happened, but that shows you the importance of the control of real estate. In countries like Thailand or Sri Lanka, certainly in Thailand especially, there are a lot of empty monasteries, like a lot. And one of the things that I can't help notice, well, the last year I was a monk in Thailand, I was offered 3 or 4 monasteries, just like random people saying, "Oh, there's a monastery near my village. It's 100 acres of forest with a hall and some kutis. Do you want to come and stay there?" And this happens that, the number of ordained monks is going down. That's one of the reasons. Also, another reason is that people really like to donate a place, but they don't really like to do the work to keep it up. So they'd rather donate a new place. But for whatever reason, there's a lot of empty monasteries. And so the Sangha is quite desperate to keep them out of the hands of the women because, well, that would be, that would be something. So one of the things that I've really learned is that safety requires a locked door. And you have to have some property. You have to have the ability to have security. And you have to be able to say, look, we're going to be able to have this place which will be ours, and we can look after ourselves and make sure that we can have that continuity. And that is such a huge part of like how the patriarchy tries to destabilize women's ordination movement. And that's one of the reasons why Ajahn Brahm especially has done such a huge effort to establish places for bhikkhunis to be in. It's not enough just to do the ordination or to publish the books and all of these things. There has to be places, and there has to be places that women can feel safe to go and feel protected. Right? So this comes under that second precept. Then the precept of sexual misconduct, right? So the precept of sexual misconduct, we've kind of touched on that a bit before. But the kind of the narrative, right? So the misogynistic narrative is then for men to project their own sexual lack of restraint and lack of just a balanced awareness about their own sexuality onto women. So women are the temptresses, women are the whatever, and so on, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I don't really need to go into that. And so when that dynamic is solidified in a patriarchal institution, then it becomes an instrument for the denial of women's voices on a kind of absolute level. And it becomes also a means for those monks to, as was said at that time, that they would say that the only reason that monks are supporting bhikkhunis is because of their own sexual desire. Right? So this is what we were told. It's only because, yeah. And so that all becomes very twisted very quickly. And look, I don't even want to go into it too much because all of the stuff is too dark and twisted. Like, it's too dark and twisted even for me. And that's pretty dark and twisted, I've got to say. So, but well, we can talk more about that later if you want. But I do want to wrap up with that too quickly. The next question is right livelihood and wrong livelihood, right? So in Buddhism, especially for monastics, okay, so right livelihood is seeking alms, right? And the idea is that we take our bowls and we go and we accept offerings from anybody who offers that. Now, what tends to happen with patriarchies is that, well, patriarchies like other patriarchies. I don't know if you've noticed that, but there's this kind of thing where, like say the extreme right in America is now sort of saying, hey, the Taliban aren't that bad. We've actually got a lot in common with them, more than you'd think, right? And so all of these things start to happen. So in traditional Buddhist countries, what that means is that the Sangha patriarchies make an alliance with the elite of society, with the royal families, with the aristocratic families, and so on. And so that means that there is a monopolization of funding on behalf of the patriarchy. I'll just give you one example of how that works. A number of years ago, I was in Chiang Mai, and I was visiting my old friend Annette, who helps to run the Eagle Guest House in Chiang Mai, or helped. I haven't seen her for many years. She may have retired by now. Anyway, there was a nun south of Chiang Mai at the time, and I wanted to go and visit her. And she was quite a well-known nun because she was running an orphanage for girls who were refugees from the wars, from the drug trade, from the human traffic trade, and so on in the borderland between Thailand and Myanmar. So in the Shan state and the north of Thailand. So there's a kind of a whole lawless region, which has actually been war-riven since, World War II never stopped in that whole area, to be honest. So the girls who were refugees and who are orphans who come out of that area, then she would take them into the nunnery, she would look after them, give them an education, give them support, and so on and so forth. And so I thought, I'd love to go down and see her and see what she was doing. So when I made some inquiries, I was told that she wasn't there. I said, where had she gone? Oh, she was down in Bangkok. Oh, what was she doing? So what she was doing was that she had taken the pieces that were crocheted and knitted and made by the girls in her orphanage, and she had a stall in the courtyard of one of the big royal monasteries there where she could sell these items to raise funds to run her orphanage. That's how they run the orphanage. Now, the monastery where she was doing that controls billions and billions and billions of dollars in financing, all of which just sits in banks and does nothing. And she was selling a cap and a shirt and a thing that was crocheted by these little girls in order to try to raise funds to keep her orphanage going. So that is how right livelihood works. Right? That is how the patriarchal elite capture monopolizes funding and means that for women, it becomes much harder to get any kind of resources, to get a place to live, to get food, and all of those things. And it all goes right the way down the line, right? It's one step after another. Now, I've seen recently in Sri Lanka that the Supreme Court recently made a ruling adjudicating that Bhikkhuni ordination was valid and that the Bhikkhuni order was a valid part of the Sri Lankan Sangha. So it's a very revolutionary ruling in Sri Lanka now. And because that was a Supreme Court finding, and because it was a well-made Supreme Court finding, according to people that I've talked to about it, have said that the judgment was actually very well thought out, well made. So it seems that basically it's impossible for that to be overturned, and that's the default situation now in Sri Lanka. So I mentioned earlier that in Thailand there was an unofficial ruling from the Thai Senate Select Committee. So that's not that's not law, but that's the advisement that Bhikkhuni ordination should be accepted. But in Sri Lanka it's now law. And hopefully that will change things, because it means that Bhikkhunis have access to things like healthcare, transport, support for like establishing like lands and monasteries, educational support, all of those kinds of things. So it's not, in any one particular case, it may or may not make a big difference, but overall it allows for the support and security of the Bhikkhuni Sangha going forward. So just to very briefly wrap up, the point I'm making here about misogyny is that misogyny is an inner defilement which manifests in terms of external structures like patriarchy, which then support the misogyny, because when you're surrounded by other men who think like that, and when your privilege, your literal buildings that you live in, and the doctrines under which you live, when these all reinforce your ideas, then it's very hard to speak out against them and to change your view. And so what you find in those kind of cases is that in the most cases, the men who stay in those environments either A, support it explicitly, B, support it implicitly, C, try to stay away from it and don't really like it but don't do anything about it, or they will leave, like myself. I just leave and try to do something else. So if we are to make a difference, obviously, I think it's really important that we be honest about these things and that we acknowledge them. It's really important that we look out for each other, that we support each other, because, like I mentioned before, so many people are going through a hell of a lot of things, okay? And when I do my meditation retreats and these kinds of things, and I hear all these kinds of stories, and you begin to realize how much suffering is being carried within people. You have so much empathy to be able to do that. So having Bhikkhuni Sangha and having just generally support for women in Buddhism is, I think, a really powerful way of being able to start stepping forward and being able to heal those things. It is crucial that if that is going to happen, that we can't repeat the same mistakes that the patriarchies have made. And we shouldn't be thinking in terms of replicating those patriarchal structures or anything like that. On the contrary, we should be thinking in terms of being able to have a fresh slate and being able to make something new and make something beautiful that's going to show an example of what can be, that isn't going to be encrusted with all of these layers of patriarchal assumptions and abuse and privilege and all of these kinds of things. So anyway, I offer that for your reflection for today, and I'd really, like I said, would really like to be able to have anyone's comments or questions or anyone's experiences and stories. Would be super. I'd be really interested to hear that, especially any feedback on the talk, anything, any strengths or weaknesses in the talk would be really helpful.
Shall I start, Bhante?
Please, Manori.
Yeah, so the other people will raise their hands and I'll unmute them as well. So it is such a wonderful talk, Bhante, and you took it to Noble Eightfold Path, which is another level, which I didn't expect, and it is so powerful. And what I wanted to ask you is, how can we as women not to get our thoughts and minds toxic and, but then stand firmly against these misogynistic ideas?
I'm not going to even try to answer that. Please, some of the other women can answer that. You guys know the experience. I want to learn from you.
Yeah, because each time you listen to a monk, or he has really good Dhamma, and then comes the misogyny, and then you get so angry. So you're trying to develop the Buddhism, and you don't want to try to develop anger, and you just do not listen to that monk forever again. So that was my kind of. But
Yeah,
then
yeah.
after that, after a while, I thought, okay, let me take what I want, let me drop what I don't want. If not, I will not learn the basics, kind of. So
Okay.
I wanted to know, like, what you think about such things.
I think, Caroline, you had your hand up before. Is that right? Can we unmute Caroline?
Anne was first. Oh,
No, Caroline, sorry, Caroline. I think
Caroline.
Caroline
Okay.
didn't have her hand, but had a hand. Sorry.
Oh, right. Oh, hand, a real hand. Yeah, one
Real
minute.
hand, yes.
Okay. I'll
Sorry,
find
Anne, we'll be with you in a second.
Yeah, I'm searching for Caroline. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your attention there on my real hand. I just would like to give the hand to Anne if it is okay. I think I think I need some time to think about it.
Oh, okay, no
But
problem.
it was like a little bit impulsive or something like that.
No problems. Anyway, how are you going, Caroline? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Germany, and yeah, I actually I could ask you if you are staying in Amaravati now, because I will go to Oxford and then I can use the chance.
No, they would not. They would not like for me to be staying there when I'm doing talks like this. No, that would not be acceptable. Yeah, I'm in Sydney.
Yeah, in Sydney. Oh, okay.
I'm in Sydney. Come to Sydney's much better.
Oh, thank you.
We got kangaroos. The beaches are better. I mean, what's not to love? Anyway, okay.
Thank you very
Anne,
much. It's
no problems, Caroline. Anne, I think you for you've gone. Is it?
And we can't hear you.
Yeah, you're unmuted, but we still can't hear
you. Okay. Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Thank you.
We can hear you now.
Yeah. Perhaps it's kind of a niche idea that doesn't apply to everyone, but I'm the mom of, well, I have two kids, but I'll start with my younger son. I think mothers of sons and fathers of sons can play a part here in how we raise our boys. I think Bhante's example of his father saying none of this sat well with us is important. And I definitely talk about this with my younger son, and my older son is actually trans. So that makes it even more difficult because I'm also living in Germany. I'm an American, though. I'm a West Coast American, so more culturally like Bhante than a lot of people that surround me. And the binarisms that people uphold in everyday
Just to let you know, Anne, that I'm fine because I know you. We're friends, okay? But just be careful about saying to Australians that they're more
just
like
different
Americans.
cultural
I mean,
approaches too. Yeah, sorry. I'm not really fully awake yet. Excuse me. So I grew up in a very relaxed idea of gender binarism. Sort of, we thought that this was going away in the 70s, and some of that kind of stayed with us there. And I find, as I found on the East Coast of the United States, and as I find here in Germany, I find sort of more, should we say maybe traditional, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, Bhante, more traditional ideas of gender binarism, and my older kid is trans. And so I'm continuously having to speak out with girls are, well, boys are, and encountering that in everyday life with people who don't know my family situation and that my child is non-binary. So his brother stands up for him, of course. But I think men can also be encouraged. I think men can be strong enough to say when one of their bros or one of their colleagues makes a sexist joke, to use their privilege to speak up for it, just as white people can do about racism, right? The parallels are almost identical. And also I think it's important, as I think was implicit in Bhante's talk, to continue to believe those who have less privilege, to continue to question our assumptions, as I think the Dhamma teaches us. And when someone says, this is my experience, and we know maybe consciously that we have more privilege than they do, to listen to them, to listen to their different experiences and to believe them as well.
Thanks so much, Anne. Yeah.
Thank you.
Reagan. Reagan's still, there you go.
There, I'm here now. I'm unmuted. I just want to take the time to thank you for your talk today, Bhante. It's very touching. There were moments when I actually did cry a little bit. It's very easy to make the assumption of living in a Western country that somehow misogyny isn't a problem, that we're further along the line of progress. But I may, as a woman in a mid-30s, English woman in England, it's very much alive and kicking. Very, very alive. It's a huge problem. My father, and I must add, my parents are only 18 years older than me, so they were kids when they had me. My father is a deeply misogynistic man. There's only a generation difference between us. There's less than 2 decades. My father was unbelievably horrible to my mother. Very not nice. But I've got to be honest, I don't like my dad very much. But what I started to realise over the last few years is that no little boy is born hating girls. So what's going wrong? What's happening? A boy and a girl, toddlers, can play together nicely, and they don't care that one's a boy and one's a girl. They don't care that one likes Action Man and the other one likes Barbie. It's irrelevant. So what's happening? What's gone wrong? Because boys aren't born that way. I think that's something, chatting now to my boyfriend about things and differences in life and how, the way things happen when we grow up. It's really sad, actually, what happens to boys when they grow up. Really sad. I'd say that looking at it from the point of view as a woman is tragic, even. Because there's a lot that goes unspoken for men as well. It doesn't justify the behaviour. I'm not condoning misogyny, but it's tragic. It brings me to another point that I'm supposed to be staying at Amaravati at the end of August, and this is making me reconsider it. I can't support Bhikkhunis and the Bhikkhuni Sangha and stay at Amaravati. That's a double standard. That's supporting misogyny, and I don't think I can do it. So thank you for that into light for me and talking about the 5 rules for the Siladharas, because this really just made me have a huge rethink. As a woman, I can't support that. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, Reagan. Thank you so much for sharing. That's really beautiful. And there's this how do I put this? Like, I hear what you're saying with your dad and stuff, and like that's really terrible because you can't form those kind of healthy bonds, when you're supposed to, and then you have to work twice as hard when you're grown up. And when we went through this Bhikkhuni thing, to me, it was kind of like that kind of family trauma to me, because these were my brothers, these were my teachers and so on. And it was really like, it was felt as a trauma. Like, I can still feel it recurring now when I talk about it. It's still difficult for me to talk about, which is only, I understand, it's only a fraction of what you've been going through or whatever, but I can still feel that it just has that stuff. And I don't know, I feel like people like yourself who have risen above that and are trying to do better, to me, you're the real heroes. I got to say that's, so thank you for what you're doing. I believe Dr. J was next.
I would like to stay anonymous on the recording, if that's okay, and not mention my name. So thank you for calling me Dr. J. You asked about what sort of like what we as women do and how we sort of dealing with misogyny. And I have worked in a male-dominated environment my whole life and come across it quite a lot. So it's quite interesting to hear how you described it and how you named how some people, let's just say, have this thing about cruelty and how that works. But I wonder, one thing that I have sort of reflect on is that I wonder if there's any kind of thing about that we were born during this time where there's a lot of harm being done to the planet, which is a feminine element. And in some ways that our fate and our destiny is part of sort of dissolving patriarchy and bringing more of the feminine to light, and that's a whole transition. And so from that point of view, it's about seeing it as a choice of bringing out true and right practice, which you have described. And I sometimes manage to hold on to that, and sometimes I also get into the pain of what it's like to be on the receiving end but of it. And I've always tried to be proactive, setting up structures where women can support other women, and if it's a corporate business world, networks or whatever, and speak up and pay the price. And I could really recognize the thing about the equivalent of what is having land or not having land, and the financial punishment I get, and sort of get cornered, and that my earnings over time, I know that's not the same as being your world of not having earnings, but I need to have earnings, and because I'm not in that world. So I guess I haven't, and it was nice. I felt deeply touched when you said that we were amongst the heroes sort of thing when you shared that. But I also have a meditation that was shared with me, which was that when I'm on the receiving end of this cruelty, on how I can protect myself and stop it, and just transform it into light and send it back like that. So that's a practice that I've got as well. And I mean, on a good day, it can be seen as an opportunity to make a difference for a more balanced, more healthy masculine, healthy feminine world. And on a not so good day, it's obviously not like that. It's more painful and it's lonely. But depends where you're at. And also, like, being a pioneer can be incredibly lonely, because there aren't that many people that understands. But I guess that's what you are as a man, in what you have experienced being a pioneer for helping dissolve Bhikkhuni, and that whole narrative. So I guess that's how potentially we can relate about being what it's like. I hope you can relate to that. But that's my gift to your question about what it's like to be a woman and making a difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Because so many people experience those things in those different ways, like you've experienced. You see those same dynamics. And I think, like, one of the things that tends to happen is that people, when we encounter Buddhism, especially if we're not from a traditional Buddhist background, people from a traditional Buddhist background maybe have a more realistic view of things in some ways, because they kind of grown up, like their uncle was a monk and stuff like that. So they kind of know these things a bit more. But when we grow up from outside that, then we tend to project onto Buddhist environments a perfection that maybe isn't always warranted. And like you were saying, that you recognize some of those same dynamics from your life, yeah? And so to be able to recognize, oh yeah, it really is the same thing that's going on in the monasteries. And again, it doesn't mean, it's not necessarily all monasteries, and it doesn't mean that everything is bad, but it does mean that we shouldn't be naive about what's happening. That's all. So thank you for that. Surakshi. Still muted, Sarakshi.
Sarakshi, did you get the unmute button? Ask to unmute button. I'm trying to press.
Oh, yeah, I've got it. Sorry. Sorry.
Excellent.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk, Bhante. It's really interesting. I came along last week, and when you were sort of deciding which talk to have last week, I was hoping you'd have the misogyny talk last week, because actually at work on Tuesday, we were meant to have a session to discuss misogyny as a team.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and unfortunately it had to be postponed because half the team weren't there, but the 5 men in our team weren't there as well. So
we're not there?
Yeah, weren't there randomly.
What a coincidence. No,
yeah, yeah. But we're having it in September, and actually I think most of the men on our team are very supportive of it. So it was just a coincidence. Right. But I was just thinking, in my line of work, we're talking about it because there's an increased rate in young boys, adolescent boys, turning towards people like Andrew Tate, who perpetuate that misogyny thinking. And there are a lot of young boys who are disillusioned, and then within that sort of like online world are becoming conditioned heavily to think like that. And I think it's really important that we're all aware of it, because it's, you know, as the other lady said, it's very prevalent. And if anything, it's increasing because people are feeling isolated and separated from each other. So I think that's something I want to share in terms of raising awareness around that, and sort of thinking around how do we then sort of like address this. And I think it is through how we bring up our boys and how we educate them and help them to understand, you know, that sense of equity between the genders.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And alongside that, the other lady said that she booked into Amaravati. I have as well for 2 retreats at the beginning of August. And now I'm kind of sitting here thinking, like, what do I do? Do I, as a woman, not go? But if I go, and can I bring my influence in the Dharma talks that they have and bring my view across? I mean, I'm conscious, like, sometimes perhaps we do need to be in those arenas to actually challenge and not just sit back and, you know, I know that one form of action is not to participate, but is there much point in me going there and sort of expressing views when there are opportunities, do you know? So it's just a question there.
Yeah. Okay. So look, thank you so much. I'm going to address both of those things you just mentioned briefly, Sarakshi. So you mentioned about the young boys and Andrew Tate and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, this is something I've been kind of observing a bit from the outside, and it's kind of worrying, right? Because I used to be a young boy, and mostly I can tell you, kind of boys are they're kind of like that. But I do agree with you that it's worse. Like I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and these days people would be like, oh yeah, that's what it was like then. But I've never met anything vaguely like the kind of misogyny and vitriol that you have today. I never encountered anything vaguely like that in the 70s and the 80s. I'm not saying it wasn't there, and I'm not saying it was ideal. I'm just saying that I agree with you. It certainly has been like manipulated much more consciously and deliberately today than it was then, no doubt about that. And then escalated through, the Trump administration and these kinds of things, which is, even goes a lot further. But in terms of boys and influence, we kind of do what we can. But one thing, as a monastic, one thing that I can say is that Sangha, in a Buddhist culture, the Sangha is supposed to be a moral exemplar for the community. And we believe that, and we are told to act in that way. Like we are told, people look up to you. Make sure that you live up to their expectations. Don't behave in a way that would disappoint people and so on, because you're setting the example. And that's, we find this idea in the suttas, and we find this is taught in monastic communities. And so when we then say we are the moral exemplar and we are putting all the men up here and the women down there, well, that sends a message. And that sends a message to every woman who walks through the door. It sends a message to every boy who walks through that door, right? And the message is clear and unmistakable and unambiguous. So that, I think, is something that really needs to be addressed. You mentioned before about going to Amarawati or whatever, your decision. I'm not here telling you where you should do or you could go, because that would make me one of them. But I'm not like that. You make your own decision, right? But one thing that I would say, when you go there, right, you know, they talk about this thing called the seat of power, right? So do you know what the seat of power is? Seat of power is an actual seat. You sit on it. And when you sit on it, you have power, right? So if you are not in the seat of power, you're in the seat of dispower. You're sitting on the floor. And when you sit on the floor, your words mean nothing. And the person on the seat of power can answer them or not answer them, and they always have the last word. And so you can't be in that kind of environment and then change things. It's like saying, I'm going to be brought before the judge and change the judge's opinion about the law, right? There's a reason why the judge sits in a seat of power. There's a reason why the king sits in a seat of power, right? And there's a reason why monks sit in a seat of power. Right? When you sit from that, when you speak from that seat, you speak with the authority of the Dhamma. And so, if you're in an environment, this is again what I was saying with patriarchy, is it's set up in a way that is inherently designed to be unequal. And so, within that environment, you can't really find equality. It just doesn't work like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful, because I didn't think about it that. And in some ways, that environment is conditioned in a certain way. That means that however much I want to kind of like develop myself, there are limitations in which I can develop myself within that environment. So that's really helpful to think about it like that, Bhante.
Yeah. Reagan tried to bring up Bhikkhunis at Amarawati. He got A, awkward looks, and B, ignored. Yes. Yes. Mo, I believe that you have your hands up.
Thanks. Yeah. Hands, two hands. What?
A hand, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I just had a response that maybe will bring up some more ways in which to combat. I personally have been thinking about disability mainly lately, and really been thinking about how often the situation is that the person that is experiencing violence perpetrated toward against them or at them is in this situation in which they're responsible to make it stop, but then obviously they're incapacitated at that time, and so I've been thinking a lot about how, I think we're talking about this, about how it really is, and what you're doing today, Bhante, in these situations, it's the people that that are what you would call in a position of privilege at that time, like maybe the other men around, that I feel like in these situations, I want to, like, I'm thinking about disability right now, and a specific experience that I've just had, but where I got really upset, and I was like, it's not me that's meant to be. It was about autism and lighting. You know about this. And it's not the autistic person that's meant to be going and buying some lights or whatever. The others. Yeah.
It's a shared responsibility, right? It's we.
Yeah. Mm.
Thanks, Mo.
Yeah.
I think that's about the questions, and I was looking at the chat, Bhante, but a lot of chats are answers to the question that I threw at the beginning. So there were lots of nice answers in the chat. So not questions.
Manori, could I just take a brief, because I'm not sure that everybody's read the chats. Can I just briefly summarize some of the things in the chats? Because I think there's some really valuable things said there, actually. So Rachel said, due diligence was a crucial factor in my search for a community. I looked into the institution's histories, how they'd managed complaints. Okay, so when I came across Anukampa, then it was like a breath of fresh air for me. That's a really important point, okay? So to do your due diligence, and, a spiritual place should be a sanctuary. You have this idea in Buddhism. One of my favorite words in Buddhism is the word kema. And kema means originally the idea of kema was it was an oasis. It was a place of, there was water, there was grass, there was trees in the middle of the desert. And a spiritual place should be like a kema. It should be like a safe lake or a safe harbor, somewhere that you can go and feel good and feel safe. And if you're always having to check over your shoulder and double guess things and make compromises, we get enough of that wherever you go. We don't have to find it in a spiritual place as well. So Rachel, that's unfortunately that's the case, but yeah. Ina mentioned that, thank you, she experienced many of my examples and was always frustrated with her father and brothers. I'm so sorry about that. Had lots of fights with them. Well, hope you won. Anyway, now I silently stand up for myself, send myself metta, and let go of my sadness, try to love them how they are. Yeah. So Susie said, I've not heard this pulled together in this way before and argued in relation to the Eightfold Path. So much respect to you and Ajahn Brahm for continuing to support Bhikkhuni ordination and take on the continuing misogyny and patriarchy. So lucky in the UK to have Venerable Chanda and the growing Anukampa community. That's true. Lucky, but also thanks to the work that Venerable Chanda especially has done, and so many other people as well. And from Sasari, a couple of people asking about the recordings, and Casey mentions, okay, so she mentioned something that helps is realizing the power of culture and conditions to the extent that it's often unconscious. Misogynistic ideas may be linked not to how compassionate that person is, but how deep they are in the culture. Yes, that's obviously true. However, one word of caution that I would just say is just be very careful about bringing Orientalist perspectives into this, because it's something that is used, I think, quite cynically by people who are opposing Bhikkhuni ordinations, that they will use these kinds of framings. Western people are like this, Asian people are like that, and so on. And you hear this kind of thing. And honestly, it's complete hogwash, because people are people, and I've had like an Asian friend of mine who come from like Hong Kong or Singapore or something like that. They'd been to monasteries in the West and were horrified at how sexist it was. And I've spoken to the women who were doing the cooking in the monastery at Wat Nanachat, and they were all like, I was like, oh, would you ever want to ordain? They say, oh yeah, if we could become bhikkhunis, yeah, we'd want to become bhikkhunis, but this is what we've got. So the idea that somehow this is like a Asian West versus East thing is, I'm not saying you're doing that, because you're not doing that. I'm not saying that. I'm merely saying that in terms of what often can be read in, if we start talking about how we're culturally conditioned. We're all culturally conditioned in our own way. So again, just to be clear, Casey, I'm not suggesting that you're doing that. I'm just bringing in the fact that kind of dialogue is often brought in. Okay, so reflecting on how painful it is to hold hatred and discrimination, right? Brings up sympathy for people who are enmeshed in delusion and harming and the inherent unpleasantness of grasping onto views that hurt others, right? Exactly. Both ways of thinking are based on my own experiences. Again, Casey continues. coming to terms with my own unhelpful and discriminatory views through my life, subconscious racism, misogyny, etc., and how I've developed a more wholesome perspective on them. So yes, again, that is crucial. Like our spiritual path should be helping us to transcend these things, right? They should be helping us to get past them. Even you know, it was mentioned, I think Siraxi mentioned about how, you know, boys are not born hating, right? And where do boys learn to hate, right? I mean, frankly, even if boys were born hating, it would still not excuse anything, because it would still be our responsibility as adults to teach them not to hate, you know? And so there's that responsibility to grow beyond those things. And it's not impossible. People do it all the time. Like, it literally happens all the time that people grow beyond these kinds of bigotry. One piece of research that I saw that was really kind of interesting, that really struck me years ago, I read, it said the main thing that has triggered shift in attitudes towards same-sex marriage, it's not like reading articles or theological shifts. It's not characters on television or any of these kinds of things. It's meeting gay people. And if you know a couple who are gay, then it's harder for you to say, well, you know, you shouldn't be able to do these things. And so those cultural shifts actually happen all the time, and often enough they happen quite quickly. Actually, if you're not reinforcing them, you'd be surprised at how quickly they can crumble. Yeah. Anyway, Boyana mentions, this is quite similar to my reflections. My father was horrible to my mum. I'm so sorry to hear that. It's very painful to hear that. And the rest of the family, as a child, I developed a lot of anger. How now, looking back at how he was raised, I'm grateful to how much he's actually transformed the cultural dogmas he was educated by. He's a huge improvement to his parents and the environment he grew up in. His son, my brother, has further developed that. Hopefully his sons will be continuing. It just helps me to have compassion for my dad, knowing that he understands the problem and is working on it. He's taught to hate, but he's done a lot of work to change it. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Boyana. That's like that's really important. And I think that's like really just to acknowledge the fact that there are men all over the place who are doing that, right? This is not again, not unusual or not unheard of. There are men all over the place who are realizing that these things are harmful and trying to do better. Yeah. Susie also mentions, I'm left wondering what monks that resist Bhikkhuni ordination are so afraid of. Yes. Well, here's the thing, you know, you don't find like diatribes against puppies, right? Nobody's saying, oh, we've got to keep puppies out and we've got to do these. Why? Because puppies don't have any power. So we don't really have to. But the fact that people are so scared of women obviously tells you something about like what that the power is and what the power of transformation is. And I mean, we could go along. There's many kind of dimensions to that. Again, I'm just going to do a bit of self-promotion. So in my, again, wonderful, if somewhat lengthy book, White Bones, Red Rot, Black Snakes, that was one of the things that I was really driven to try to understand, like what is going on there and what are the sort of unconscious things that's happening. And Dr. J mentions, I think, working towards a healthier way of being from both men and women and how we bring up both girls and boys can help dissolve the system of patriarchy. Thank you so much. Yes. Okay, great. Manoy's posting it again. Excellent.
I pasted it back for the people who forgot, because it's right at the top, Bhante.
Okay.
So
okay, great.
Thank you very much, Bhante, and it was such a wonderful talk. And today we have 36 people, and this is going to be a very, very strong video in you know, I think in the years to come. Thank you very much for the talk and your knowledge, your experience, and your kind of, you know, support for the other 50% of this world. And I like to say a few words about the generosity as well, and thanking all of you who have come here. And giving develops wholesome qualities that form the foundation of our Dhamma practice. And as Buddha said, the wisest way to give is when one gives with heart full of joy, for the purpose of beautifying the mind, for equipping the mind, and for the practice of serenity and insight. That was taken from Anguttara 8.33. So here at Anukampa, while giving space for bhikkhunis, future bhikkhunis to, in this part of the world and outside the world as well, because we've got some visa, we can apply for visa for international bhikkhunis as well. So we have several ways to cultivate this beautiful quality of giving. And as you know, there is one-time donation you can do from our website. There's a bank transfer, there's PayPal, there's SumUp, or if you're financially able, you can do standing orders, and anything is not too small. It is developing our generosity. And you can offer any other specialties that you have as a volunteer, or, and you can talk to team@anukampaproject.org and talk to them and see how you can get involved. And after the Vasa, when Venerable comes back, there will be more opportunities. And there is events, there is November events, so have a look and subscribe to our newsletter as well. And thank you again, Bhante, and it is wonderful to have you here.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thanks so much, Manori. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to also Venerable Chanda and Sangha at Anukampa for inviting me. So this is the last of these couple of talks we'll be giving, and I'm wishing you all the best. And but we will be in touch, of course, and hopefully be seeing you again before too long.